Welcome to Let Me Know How It Is, a pop culture podcast about TV, movies, comics, and all things geek. Today, we do a deep dive on legacy characters. I'm Zach Slater.
I'm Frank Melman.
This is Tommy Smithereens.
And I'm Clifton.
All right, so this is a detail that comes up with astonishing frequency in past conversations of ours. I love this idea, Frank. I know you adore this idea. I think we all do.
I do.
Honestly, yep. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So we'll explore it in greater detail. Legacy characters. So when I think of this, I think comics mostly, right? I mean, I'm sure there are instances where this applies in other media, but I think comics kind of does it best, or that's where it shines. So we'll stay on comics for a little bit, and we'll jump to other media towards the back half of the show. So I'm gonna lob it over to you guys. What do you guys like about it? What works? What's cool? Go for it.
Oh, can I say my favorite rendition of a legacy character? At least what I was introduced firsthand, as far as
sure.
The Flash. I never knew Jay Garrick existed. I thought Barry was the one and only. And then looking back at the past and seeing that the Flash wore a tin hat and looked like Hermes a bit more was astonishing, in my opinion.
Or the FTD floral bouquet guy.
Yeah.
Yes.
He's got to get those flowers there fast.
I know, right?
Yeah. Who knew he ran him door to door,
Yes.
Right.
Otherwise, we won't get tipped.
Yeah. But yeah. No, it was Barry and his predecessor, which was Kid Flash, Wally West.
Yeah.
That made me think that, yeah.
No, so that's one of my favorites too. When I was thinking about the getting the notes together for this episode, I was thinking of that's the earliest one that I could think of, at least in comics, was the idea that because Barry's the one that basically is reading. They flash back, or it might be a more modern thing, but the idea that Barry was flashing back to the idea of reading the whole the trope of reading under the sheets with a flashlight, reading old Flash comics with Jay Garrick in them, long before he becomes the Flash, not realizing that those stories or those adventures basically are being broadcast into the writers on Earth 1. that's like a story. That's how they basically rationalize it later, as opposed to just like, we just wrote stories and happened to be close to what the adventures were. But yeah, he read all these stories as a kid about Jay Garrick, and maybe it's one of those things where it subconsciously affected him to the idea of like, I'll be the Flash myself when I get these superpowers. So
right. So let's run a comb really quick through what you're saying. So initially, right, Jay Garrick existed as a Flash comic book character in Wally West's universe. This is pre-Crisis, right? So conventionally,
in Barry Allen's,
right,
yeah,
right. Okay, sorry, I said it backwards. Right. So conventionally, I think people think right that Jay Garrick was the Flash prior to Barry Allen becoming the Flash. Right, as part of the JSA. That's something that comes about, in the 80s, right? That's something that's right. Okay.
Right. Post-Crisis is one of those things where it's before the idea that we had Earth 1 and Earth 2 in the Silver Age, and then the early part of the modern. And then once we have the idea that, once we have Post-Crisis, it's the idea that Barry basically, all those events took place in the same Earth. But before that, it was the idea that Barry had read those comics as a kid.
Right.
So, yeah, and then of course he's inspired to be the Flash once he gets the powers. Obviously, he doesn't wear the tin hat and all that good stuff because he wasn't in World War I. So,
right.
Yeah.
This was my first encounter with it too. I'm pretty sure my first conscious encounter of it. The older I get, I realize that, a lot of the Batman and Robin that I was into at the time really was Jason Todd.
Yeah.
So technically I think really that Robin might have been the first legacy character, right? Because,
sure.
Dick Grayson becomes Nightwing in 84.
Right.
And so when I'm thinking about Batman and Robin, I always think Dick Grayson is Robin, but really, truthfully, most of my childhood, Jason Todd was actually Robin.
Right.
During that period,
Sure.
But anyway, but casting that aside really quick, yeah, I mean, Wally West being the Flash was the first instance for me I'm the guy that is now second or third in line before somebody else did this as the Flash before me.
Right.
Yeah. And for me also kind of the gold standard. I think, as far as it being done in comics. I think that that run of Wally West books in the 90s and the early 2000s, I think really like Legacy is an important aspect of all of those books.
Sure, for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, Wally is very, very much the idea of, you're going to be a kid and then one day you're going to surpass your mentor and then you're going to be what your mentor was. That to me, that's because again, as you mentioned, Dick Grayson, Dick was like, that's cool. I don't want to be Batman. I'll be my own thing. And even goes so far as to take the name of originally, I don't know what the inspiration is now for Nightwing, but originally it was, originally he had just taken it because when Superman was in the Bottle City of Kandor, he's Nightwing and Flamebird. He has like a Batman type identity because he has no powers there. And he was Nightwing.
Right. Him and Jimmy Olsen had to solve a crime in Kandor. Right. So they just assumed Batman and Robin like identities.
Exactly. So they would put on these costumes and have each would have their domino mask and they would be Nightwing and Flamebird. So for whatever reason, Dick was like, no, I'm inspired by Superman to take that name. Not I would be Batman, which is very telling. Right. But Wally was like, from the jump, Wally was a fan of Barry, of the Flash, not knowing he was, at that point, his Aunt Iris was the one who took him to meet, stodgy old Barry Allen, the nerd with the bow tie who, worked with in a lab, wasn't even a regular cop, he was a scientist. And then was also, Barry pulls a trick of, well, I'm going to pretend to be I'm going to run around this door real fast and put on my Flash costume. And then I'm going to introduce you to the Flash. And then Wally gets exposed to the same chemicals and lightning that the Flash did, that Barry did. And then grows up to be Kid Flash, and then eventually becomes the Flash.
Yeah, and like we were saying, Barry is his presence is felt in those books, even without like they don't go to the well a lot, really, as far as seeing flashback stuff of conversations that he had with Barry and stuff like that. Like you don't see a lot of flashback scenes. You don't see there's not a lot of force ghosting of Barry showing up, right? It's just not
for a while because they want it there early on. It's a combination of Wally being afraid of surpassing and or replacing Barry, versus the idea of just, I think DC at that point wanted what they had done in Crisis to stick. So there was definitely a feeling of let's move on to the next thing,
right,
or the next character that's with the same name. So
I just think that it's a neat, it's kind of it's a neat narrative trick where his presence is felt so much without him really actually showing up a lot. Oh yeah, right? I'm not going to say it's zero. Sure. I mean, there's a pinnacle, Wally West story that's the return of Barry Allen. It's one of the some of the finest comic book reading you'll ever do, but it's I feel I feel like today this dynamic, you would see Barry pop up in flashback after flashback after flashback just to sort of keep his presence there. And I just think it's kind of neat that he's there without really doing a whole lot with him,
Yeah. Oh yeah. There's not a lot of, he looms, his character looms largely within the first couple of years of that book, when you have Mike Barron and then you also have William Mesner-Loebs writing the book. It's definitely the idea that Wally, he's talked about, even, there's even an issue where the Rogues get together and they sort of kid Wally about the idea that, you're Kid Flash. You're not really the Flash. We'll kind of take it easy on you because we had so many things go on with Barry, with your predecessor. But yeah, there's not really, he's not, without being in it, without being heavy on the flashback, heavy on, all that kind of storytelling. It's not till Wade comes on, and like you said, with the return of Barry Allen, that you really get that first glimpse of the idea of okay, maybe Barry's been gone long enough that we can actually show him again.
Right.
And then that story, plays out. So.
So what is it Frank? What is it that you like about this idea? So it's something you bring up a lot.
I do.
What's attractive about the idea to you?
Well, for me, when I was thinking about notes and thinking about just legacy characters in general, I started thinking about the Silver Age, and the idea that when Julius Schwartz, the editor at the time, thought there was a lot of Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman have been pretty much published throughout DC's time. They didn't really go away, but the other characters went away when superheroes kind of took a downturn and they were doing romance and war and monster comics and all that stuff was going on. But he saw value in the idea of names like Green Lantern and the Flash and Hawkman and the Atom and and he thought, well, we could do something with this. We just have to put a more sci-fi or futuristic spin on what we had done before in order to make it work. And for me, it was the idea that, that idea of characters enduring, or character or something that we can basically look at and be like, oh yeah, there's mileage in this, even if it's not the same thing we've done before. Plus, the other thing about what I love about legacy characters is some of my earliest collecting of comics was trying to figure out or trying to get issues that had a lot of characters from like Earth 1 and Earth 2 together. So I could try to establish what was the connections between these characters. How do they know each other? Why was there 2 Green Lanterns? Why was there 2 Flash? Why wasn't there another Dr. Fate? Why wasn't there 2 Wildcats?
Right.
That kind of thing.
I gotcha.
That was a lot of my early collecting of comics, was just trying to get, because at that time, hate to break it to you kids, there was no internet. There was no easy way to like, well, what's the deal with Ted Grant? Let me look on the internet for an hour and a half and get, fall down a YouTube hole of information about Wildcat. You had to wait till, an issue came up or someone talked about him, or he's in a Brave and the Bold or a DC Comics Presents or whatever.
Or there's an editor's note.
Right. Or an editor's note. Exactly. So that was the case. So for me, it was just, I knew there was a universe and I wanted to know as much as I could about it. And the only way to do that was to buy comics that had a million characters. Like all the JLA, JSA crossovers were big for me because I knew I'd get 15 to 20 characters that I might have never seen before.
Right. Tommy, Clifton, what's attractive about it to you guys? What is it you like about it?
I mean, I like the story. I like the shorthand. Like, you come in, enough about characters already just from them being a legacy. Like, you kind of know what to expect partly, but then you also get those stories like Wally West and like you were saying, Zach, like that was my introduction. Like, I didn't know there was a Jay Garrick for a long, long time, but I did know there was a Barry Allen and then a Wally West. So that was my introduction to Legacies that way. And the fact that the story was about like, how do you honor the person before you? I've always liked, or how do you break tradition? Like, if you need to, from the person before you. I liked that the stories were always about transition, about the legacy of the character, as we call them, legacies. So I mean, that's always what I liked about it. And as it goes, like, you kind of got, you get whole families, and yeah, you just know what to expect from a Robin. You know what to expect from a Green Lantern. So it does some heavy lifting to get you into the story and get you to the meat of characters.
Right.
Like, what's different about this one and what's different about the next one.
Yeah, and I say, going along with what Clifton was saying, to me, I also like that, but it gave me a contemporary take on a old idea without having to retcon it,
Right.
I like the fact that it kept validity and how can I put it? It kept the original pristine without belittling it,
Yeah.
It sort of made you want to seek out the what made the older one good in his time, and it kept it for that time. It made me appreciate the older one better, and I like that feeling, as opposed to taking that same character and making him new in today's times. Just seem weird and disjointed, instead of just making the character a new character altogether. It allows new stories while keeping the same subset and basically what made that character, Yeah.
There's a nice kind of cleanup that it does on the character too. This is an idea that just kind of came to me as you were talking, that like, it is a nice, like, you can suddenly now make a character like one thing in a memory, right? In a like Hal Jordan is known for this, right? And you can kind of clean up a little bit of like stuff you kind of want to ignore, or stuff that like didn't make sense about the character like in the past, right? You can sort of like run a comb through things and be like, okay, like this is like kind of the core truth of the character like in this moment. And now it's like when you could put the character's legacy in a sentence that the follow-up character says, right. I think it's got kind of like a cool like ordering process, just kind of like making everything neat and tidy. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
I'm just thinking off. Like I said, like it's not like a fully baked idea. Like it just sort of like came to me as you guys were talking. But one of the things I like about it too is I liked it sort of as a side effect. You get time as a bullet point to this, because comics, especially, I think, unless you're reading a specific character's run where there is like a beginning, middle, and end to it, comics are kind of like you can kind of cherry pick left and right, and there's no real rhyme or reason to this story happened before this one, before that one, right? There's only like a couple of instances where like it's obvious, right? Like Batman Year One is supposed to be like the first story, right? But I like that Legacy kind of gives you sort of like a linchpin in a character's history that like, okay, like always, right? There are these stories that happen before Barry Allen dies, and then Wally West takes over.
Sure.
Right. You get kind of an ordering side side effect by that. And I think that's kind of neat too. I like when time can get inserted into comic book things when so much of the medium is really just like exists on like people picking up and carrying on with the characters after people have touched them and moved on. Right. Like,
right.
That's one of the selling points of comics, right? That like, Bruce Wayne is always Batman, and that like, when somebody's done with that character, somebody else is going to pick it up and Bruce Wayne's still going to be Batman, and it's going to continue for 80 years.
Sure.
We hope, right? But yeah.
I think it just brings a natural longevity to a character without having to change it often. I mean, wrong. Great. I like those characters that haven't received their supposed legacy, like the 80-year-old Batman. But it's just more explaining as to why he's stuck in time, as opposed to having someone organically take the mantle over, especially when you've already seen it to a bunch of characters. But I was confused a bit. It's when I saw the Flash debut. Didn't DC go through a period in which it changed all its characters like that? Like what you saying earlier?
Yeah, I mean, this was something that when I think legacy characters, I do think DC, because I think that there was a period when in my youth when I was getting really into comic books and getting really into this stuff. I felt like Legacy was represented a little better in DC in the 90s and the early 2000s than Marvel was doing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think that there was a period also like later on where I think when I think of the companies now, I think that they're kind of like neck and neck.
Okay.
Because Marvel's introduced a lot of legacy to their characters too, and really like kind of in a short period of time, relatively. When I think about it, but I don't know what you guys are thinking about. You guys have been, have been reading a little bit longer and more vast things than I have too. So I think that you guys have a little bit of a different opinion about it, possibly, I think, than I do.
Yeah, I mean, both in the Silver Age, when DC first started their legacy thing, they did a little earlier, like with Flash to Jay Garrick, to Alan Scott, to Hal Jordan, the Green Lanterns. Marvel also dabbled in it slightly in that they revisited some old heroes and then just made new versions, like Human Torch. You had a Golden Age Human Torch, and then you have Silver Age Johnny Storm, Fantastic Four Human Torch. They have the same powers. They have the same name, but they're not connected. And so Marvel decided not to make that connection at the time that DC did between Barry Allen and Hal Jordan. And then the next big kick you get of legacy, I think, like we were talking, is post-crisis, because then you've got DC cleaning up a lot of what they had decided to explain as alternate timeline stuff and alternate realities, alternate Earths, to kind of make, like, how do we get all these different Earth characters to coexist in one place? And then you kind of got legacies that way. And then at the same time, you were also getting, like, Crisis, the storyline brings in a new Dr. Light.
Right.
Of the same name, same outfit, but now this one's not bad like that one was. And then you get, when was Infinity Incorporated, Frank? Was that like late 80s?
It's right around the time of, it's right before, because Roy Thomas was in control of like All-Star Squadron and Infinity Inc. So it's right around 83, 84.
Okay, so yeah, around the same time then is like leading up to Crisis, sounds like. You started getting some new versions of like Wildcat and stuff that's kind of being represented now in the Stargirl show. Like those are characters that are borrowing from that storyline of that legacy story.
Yes. Yeah, because some of the stuff that happens in Crisis leads to there being, a call for other characters, or some characters that were in Infinity Inc. don't survive Crisis, that kind of thing.
Right.
But I was going to bring up Stargirl, because Stargirl is definitely a place of, especially to the JSA, the idea that there was these characters in the 40s or earlier or later, depending on who all survived, being a team, and then much later we have Courtney and the rest of the kids taking up the legacies of these other characters. And again, this, like you said, that's straight out of Infinity Inc., because that's where a lot of those characters first appeared, or like I said, in Crisis, some of them appear there, but it's one of those things where it's right around the same time. But a lot of that stuff, again, gets shifted around because of what happens in Crisis.
Right.
There was a lot of trying to figure out what exactly worked and what exactly existed and what exactly didn't work in order for those books to continue or not continue, as it were.
Yeah. And then Marvel's approach was always a little different than DC. Like you said, in Silver Age, they didn't decide to make the connection between the two Human Torches, not in the way that DC did with Barry and Jay Garrick. But then you do start to get a little legacy creeping in. Like one of the earliest ones I can think of personally is Scott Lang.
Right. Yeah.
Taking up the mantle of Ant-Man, whereas his story, like his comic story it's similar to the movie story, different motivation, but he steals the Ant-Man suit from Hank Pym in the comic to save his daughter's life, because his young daughter is terminally ill and being basically held hostage. Not terminally ill, but is seriously ill and being held hostage, and he sees like he needs the criminals tell him to get the Ant-Man suit, so he robs the suit. And that was like one of the first Marvel instances I can think of a real legacy of somebody else like taking on a full identity and being like, I'm Ant-Man now, and being like, I'm that character now. And I think that was late 70s.
Yeah, I believe so. I believe it's right around.
He's one of my favorite instances when it comes to the Marvel versions. He's like, there's just I like, kind of, for lack of a better term, I like kind of like the shock value of that we got. Like we got kind of a guy with a checkered past. Yeah, that's becoming a hero, and I like that it's becoming that you get simultaneously like living up to the legacy, but it's also a redemption story for him also. Yeah,
he's definitely carving like that character does not follow the same sort of path that Hank Pym does. Right. And sort of carves out his own niche about what he's going to do once he gets the actual suit, which I always like too.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's nice that he's not just a carbon copy of the previous hero. Like he's doing it differently. He's got different reasons for doing it. He's a different guy.
Yeah. I always think that's important when it
much more of an everyman quality to it too. Like he's, I think it is done really well in the MCU. I think it translates very, very well to it. And, like I was saying, I thought one of the interesting things was, because like I said, I always associated Legacy with DC a lot, but I thought it was really cool that it was the one edge I think DC had for the films that Marvel didn't have. And then it was like Ant-Man came out. I'm like Marvel beat DC to Legacy even on the screen. Like,
Well, I think some of that had to do with having a cohesive, successful plan. They were around long enough with a consistent track record to get to Legacy, and unfortunately, DC cinema has not gotten there yet.
And it's effective, even in a sense. It's not like we don't see Michael Douglas Ant-Man in other stuff. Like it's all introduced within that same movie. Like you get
the whole concept.
You get the legacy aspect and the current guy like all introduced at the same time. And it works. I think, there is that sense of history that comes along with it that they're able to sort of accomplish like very quickly,
But to me, I like to say I attribute that type of connection to Edgar Wright, in which it was his screenplay or his script that incorporates it well as to fix that gaping hole that was created by the MCU and not having Henry Pym as a starting member of the Avengers.
Right.
DC does do it, but they do it to me in a way that I didn't think they did it with Captain Marvel. when they bring the character out, it's mentioned that you're not the first to have the power of Shazam, which is true.
Right.
You could argue to think that Black Adam was the first incarnation of Captain Marvel.
Yeah.
In that instance, it's no similar than Dr. Light to have your predecessor be evil and you trying to correct that, that mistake. So
yeah,
DC does it subtly, but I don't think they did it on purpose because no one really thinks about Black Adam as being the predecessor to Captain Marvel.
Right. And we'll see when that movie comes out too. But yeah, I agree with you. I think typically I feel like DC kind of in the movies at least kind of throw stuff against the wall, and then it's sort of like, okay, like maybe like this is a nugget that a director later will pick up and kind of run with. Right. Hopefully, maybe we'll see.
And they did make their own legacy in the Suicide Squad with Ratcatcher 2. So that was an original, That was an original legacy character created for the movie that did not previously exist in the comics.
Right.
With the concept of legacy introduced to it. So we get the actual Ratcatcher introduced, but as a gone villain by that point.
I think Marvel-wise, talking MCU, I think it's also really effective in Black Panther. Which, I mean, really, if we're splitting hairs, it's really like two movies because he comes in Civil War and you see his dad, and we know his dad is the Black Panther, right? It's mentioned at least in that movie. But I mean, like we get to at least see him in action briefly in the Black Panther movie, which I think is cool.
Right.
And I think it's really, really well done. And unfortunately, it looks like circumstances are going to like kind of force the legacy thing even farther along faster than I think that we wanted. Right. We don't know exactly what's happening with Black Panther 2, but it seems to be at least like rumors that are rumbling around that somebody else is going to pick it up.
Right.
Which is exciting. It was extremely exciting, but
sure.
Yeah. We haven't gotten into Kyle Rayner yet, which I'm surprised about.
Yeah. That to me, Kyle Rayner is part of certain characters that I think are habitually becoming legacy characters. I mean, like the Green Lanterns. Like, how many new Green Lanterns have we gotten since Kyle Rayner?
Yeah, a lot.
We got Simon Baz, correct? And then
Cruz.
Yep.
Right.
And now we get there's a black woman who's a Green Lantern.
Sojourner, Joe.
Yeah, Sojourner. Yeah, there it is.
Yeah. I think the cheat that they had with Kyle is the backstory tied to him becoming Green Lantern, where he was the only one in the universe.
Right.
So it was easy to focus on him. Right. Whereas now where it's like there's a core again, and there's, thousands and thousands of Green Lanterns out there in every sector, right? Like in every sector of space. That like it's such a natural idea to keep like creating new people. Like, so on some hand, I get like, because it's just easy, right? It's an easy thing to do. But I'm with you. Like, I feel like that it's gotten diluted now, where it's sort of like there's characters out there I forget. Like I keep like Simon Baz like showed up very quickly and was used a lot, and then kind of like within a period of a couple of years, kind of like went to the back burner a little bit.
Yeah, it wasn't nearly as prominent.
And it wasn't like he was killed off or anything. Like, he's still around, just like it's just nobody's doing much with him yet. Now.
Yeah, I kind of think the character was meant to make a bigger splash and didn't for whatever reason. So, like you said, I know there was a Rebirth book with him and I believe Jessica Cruz together, but beyond that, I don't know what else they've done. So,
right,
yeah, but then it makes me think about the next thing with legacy characters, where some characters are more a legacy than their actual standout appearances. Like, sorry to push the conversation a little bit further, but it makes me think of Buffy, in which the character is a legacy character, but for some reason this is the best depiction of the legacy characters, like Aang in Avatar: Last Airbender. In which there's a long-standing generations of the character, and then we get to see one plucked forward, in which they're the most poignant of their series of legacy.
Yeah, it's always interesting when they try and do the idea of there's a legacy behind the character, but this is your entry character into that legacy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like that's something that happens, fairly frequently. The idea of like you said, Luffy or Hong, Aang. But yeah, that's one of those things where, sorry, I don't know what I was thinking. I was getting my Shyamalan confused for a minute.
Right.
But
well, and that's 100% T'Challa too.
Sure. Also,
definitely.
right.
I mean,
100%.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep. That's him as well.
Yeah. I was, there was like in DC also had Connor Hawke, which is another one. Like, he was the Green Arrow of the 90s that had his own title that went, I don't know how many issues, 60, possibly even into the hundreds, right? Like,
Right.
I mean, he was pretty prevalent in that, was a member of the Justice League during Grant Morrison's run and everything like that. And it's another one that just kind of like, when Ollie came back,
right.
And like there was a period where Connor was still around and was sort of like kind of getting used here and there, but hasn't really popped up in anything too much in the last like at least 10 years, possibly even 20,
Well, they've brought it back recently.
Right.
And he's in the current, well, he has been, I don't know how much he is now, but he was in the current Robin series, the one with Damian, that's out probably about, I think it's like 5 or 6 issues in. He's in that.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, he's popped up in the last like 2 months.
Yeah.
Right.
Recently,
essentially.
right.
Yeah.
But no, but I think it's also just the idea that, I think we're, with all the stuff that like we're talking about the 90s fairly heavily, if we don't touch on the idea that, after, let's say, I don't know, Death of Superman, I guess is probably the watermark, where basically after that, you have all the stuff with Batman and Bane, and then you have Emerald Dawn and, all that stuff. Or was it Emerald Dawn? Is that the one with Hal?
Emerald Knight.
You mean
or Emerald Twilight? I'm talking about Emerald Twilight.
Yeah. I was like, Emerald Dawn's the retelling of his origin, right?
Right.
Yeah,
that's what I was thinking. Yeah, that's why I was confused. Like, no, it's Emerald Twilight. But you have Emerald Twilight, and you have all these moments where all these, all these mainstays characters basically are dying, or they're turning evil, or they're getting their back broken, that kind of thing. And they had their calls, the replacements, time for the replacements, call it the replacements. Let's see who's gonna take up the mantle. That was very prevalent in the 90s. So you had a lot more instances where characters were replaced, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
I mean, if you think about it, Superman, Batman, Green Arrow, Green Lantern, Flash, Wonder Woman for like a minute,
right?
Had Artemis, Artemis step in with the contest, and but this is pretty prevalent at that point, for whatever reason. Just I guess it was just the success of the Death of Superman that made them think, well, we could do this,
Right.
And then it was like for my own reading, it was interesting when New 52 hit and sort of DC was taking like an aggressive stance, and like we need to streamline everything again. And they were kind of, in my opinion, I think went a little too far, throwing out all of their history. And so there was a point where I was not reading a lot of DC at this time. And it was like around that same time, and then a couple of years, like Marvel decides to go like all in on Legacy. And that's
right.
what you get within a couple of years, you get like Lady Thor, right? Sam Wilson's Captain America. You get X-23 as Wolverine. Miles Morales comes into the main MCU as Spider-Man.
Right.
Kate Bishop Hawkeye, right?
Yeah,
Ironheart. Amadeus Cho becomes Totally Awesome Hulk, which is one I kind of forgot about. But I mean, this is all like within a couple of years of itself in Marvel, and a lot of this stuff is really, really cool.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, those are talking like 2014, 2015, and some of my favorite Marvel stories of definitely the last decade of many recent years. And like Kamala Khan, Miss Marvel, and the Goddess of Thunder. I love that run. I love that Jason Aaron run.
It's a great run.
Yeah.
It's terrific. But yeah, for me, it's funny that we get that, we get this basically this explosion of the idea that we need to, there's a lot of cachet and a lot of like Ms. Marvel. Like everyone knows Ms. Marvel. It was, from the 70s or whatever, that she was part of the Avengers and had her own book. But, I don't know if anyone was, pining away for a new Ms. Marvel title until they created Kamala Khan.
Right.
So,
yeah.
It's one of those things where I don't know how much that was planned. Like I know it was a risk for them to do it the way they did it.
Yeah.
But but for it to hit as big as it did,
right.
I mean, the number one went through like 6 printings.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is pretty, for a book nowadays is incredibly impressive.
Right.
This doesn't really happen anymore. So, but yeah, I think it's interesting to me when looking at that whole thing, and then the fact that led into Marvel's Crisis with Secret Wars by Jonathan Hickman.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Where basically they dealt with a lot of like their, multiverse.
Right.
And then trying to put it all together in one streamlined world or Earth or whatever. He lays all that out in Avengers over the course of like 3 or 4 years. Event. It is. It's a great event. It's
a fun event that still, you will never convince me otherwise. I think it's completely motivated by, like, I think it's manufactured completely to get Miles Morales in the Marvel universe. And from the Ultimate Universe. I think that was number one bullet point.
I could see that.
They're like, we want Miles in the Marvel Universe.
That makes perfect sense. I don't see why it wouldn't be. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no. I totally can see that too.
And I like what I like about the way Marvel's doing it now is in DC, you typically had to get like a character getting killed off or a character turning evil. And I like that Marvel just sort of is like we don't care. Like, we're going to have X-23 Wolverine, and we're going to have Logan as Old Man Logan, like in the same universe, and we're fine with it. You're going to have, like, Peter is still there as Spider-Man, and Miles Morales is there as Spider-Man, and they're both called Spider-Man, and you figure it out. It's not that hard. Like, you know what I mean? Right? Like,
but I think it's one of those things where that's as much as I love Crisis, and I will always stand up and say I love Crisis on Infinite Letters from DC. I do think that's part of the fun of comics is the idea of, I mean, and again, you look at the MCU stuff that's coming up within the next, out of the Loki show, and then what's coming up with, with What If, and then what's coming up in the movies with No Way Home and Multiverse of Madness, the idea that, no, there's, it's a vast multiverse. You're going to run into various versions of, other characters or yourself, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that, as we're getting away from legacy stuff, I still think it's cool, the idea that, no, if you, it's interesting to me when you always have the idea of, I want this to go on because I think the world needs, whatever hero to carry on a legacy, right? That's ultimately what I think is important. And I think, DC is starting to get back to that in a way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think they're starting to inch back towards that. Then embrace Marvel's, full, like you said, Marvel's full on because we're getting a lot of, in the next phase of stuff, we're getting a lot of characters that are legacy characters.
Right. We've already got Sam. We already got Sam stepping up.
Yeah.
Which is a big one.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's an entire show built around essentially like that decision for him to become Captain America.
Right.
Right.
Which is well done. And with also the added complication of not only playing off of Steve's legacy, but then you also introduce Isaiah Bradley's legacy simultaneously, like in there as well. And I think,
and John Walker.
Right. Yeah. And it's a beautifully, like, for whatever it was, like 6 episodes.
Right.
Yeah.
Like the amount that they do in that. Right. And you get to see just how, like, conflicted Sam is about it and everything, and how, like, he's not a super soldier.
Right.
Yeah.
He's a normal guy. You know what I mean? Like, he's in shape, he's got training, but, he's not, he doesn't have a procedure that made him into a superhero like Steve Rogers did.
Right.
Right. But I mean, like, we're talking like the next, like, beyond what we, like the movies, we have all the multiverse stuff, but we have like legacy characters in Kamala Khan, and then in Ms. Marvel keeping up. We have She-Hulk coming up. We have Love and Thunder, which is another instance where we're going to, however that's going to play out, an idea of legacy as well. So I just like the idea that they're doing, when I think about what I like about comics and about superheroes in general and that kind of story. I mean, we'll talk about it more in a bit, but the idea that it extends to other stuff as well. I do think it's really cool that Marvel was not afraid to be like, sure, let's do all this, let's do all this legacy stuff to extend our world.
What about bad guys as legacy characters? How does it work? Is it like I mean, I'm surprising you with you guys with it, but I'm just thinking about it. Like, I mean, are there a lot of instances where a bad guy is picking up the mantle from somebody else? Because I think it's kind of like an interesting avenue that you could see played with, right? Like, you can get all the legacy hero stuff in the same themes, but played out differently.
Right.
You know?
No, the best example that I researched was I didn't even think about it, but um, if you guys remember Gargoyles, the whole Hunter's Moon arc, in which to chronologize what Demona did in the past and how people took the family mantle as the hunter of gargoyles or the whole thing with what Gilcomane, is that the name of the character, in which he passed it on to his children and their children as to stop Demona from doing stuff. But to me, that was the best example of I can think of a villain permeating his legacy through his children and whoever he was a family member from. I don't know if you guys remember that or not, or
no, I do.
Yeah,
that's one of my favorite aspects of the show.
Yeah,
you know, for me, when I'm thinking of bad guys as legacy, like I think of very like short instances. I think of instances that I think, you know, one where I think they were hoping it was going to stick around and then nobody did anything with it, and one that I think we might see creep up. Maybe, I don't know. One of them was Nessa. In Death and the Maidens, right? Who was another daughter of Ra's al Ghul, Ra's al Ghul,
right?
However you want to say it. Raz is correct. But you know, like there was a point where Raz was dead in the books, right? And I think meant to be actually dead, right? Not one of those where, like, I mean, you got the Lazarus pit, so there's always an out to bring him back easily, right? But I think he was intended to be like, no. We're turning the page on this character, and he's got a daughter that's like worse than he is, and far more sadistic than he is, and
Rachel's most and sincerely dead, and we're going to move on, right?
Yeah, and you know, she comes around in this fantastic story called Death and the Maidens and everything, and you know, she creeps up in Arrow. And stuff, which was a nice head fake because I think everybody was you know expecting Talia as the build up what they were leading to, and then it's kind of a, you know, you're thrown for a loop a little bit when it's like, Nessa, huh? Okay, who's that? For some people, I know, like,
for sure.
You know, so I think she was out there for like, hopefully people are gonna like play with this and have some fun with it, and I don't think it went as far as they were hoping. And then the other one that kind of jumps to me is the Lady Doc Ock in Spider-Verse.
Sure, that was one I was going to bring
which I think is awesome, and you know, and I hope somebody does some more with it because I think it's awesome and it's really great.
Yeah.
But no, I was going to say, like, they've done Marvel's done a fair amount with that sort of thing where you've got like the Lady Doc Ock, not so much, but I know that there's a female Electro,
right,
that they brought in,
female Beetle, Beetle from Superior Force of Spider-Man,
Beetle's daughter,
right?
That's right.
Or is she daughter? No, she's Tombstone's daughter, right?
I think so. I have to look that up.
Yeah, she's Tombstone's daughter that becomes the Beetle.
Ah, okay.
Right. Yeah.
There was a female Scorpion at one point who I think became a hero around the time that Aranya was introduced into the comics, or early 2000s. White Tiger, because wasn't White Tiger a villain? And then the daughter is not a villain?
No, I think I have to check, but I thought White Tiger was a hero was
the original White Tiger a hero? I just can't remember the stories.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure because it's one of those things where, like, White Tiger, if I remember correctly, is introduced in the black and white like Deadly Hands of Kung Fu or something like that had like had rotating stories of Iron Fist and him and Shang-Chi.
Okay,
but
I think one of my favorites is not said outright, but I mean it's hinted at. I like when you get into season 2 of Young Justice and you see Calder is running around with Black Manta, who's his dad, right? And you know, and the design aesthetic is very much in line with what Black Manta looks like, and his uniform has changed, and you know, and I like that they're kind of like hinting at like, oh, like he's gonna be Black Manta whenever, like at some point that mantle's gonna get passed down to Calder, which I think is very, very cool. And then I like going forward, I like when you get to season 3. I mean, this is one of my absolute favorite things of season 3, and I wish that they would spend more time with it. Is you see through like during the time jump that Calder becomes Aquaman. You know, like graduates to become the hero, and I love that. And it's one of those things where like for the first time, I'm saying I want more Atlantis stuff because I want to know like what happened to Arthur, like what happened to make him pass it on or to give it up. You know, like I just want to know, like, because like as far as I remember, he's not in season 3 anywhere.
I don't recall.
Right?
No, but if you recall, he was saying that I think the duties as a king far surpasses him being able to be playing Aquaman, which makes
playing superhero, right?
Yeah, it makes a hell of a lot of sense if you think of how vast Atlantis would be.
I want to know what that means, though. Also, you know what I mean? I just like, I hope that we get to see that, you know, somewhere, which, you know, knowing the Young Justice universe, that'll be in a comic book someplace or something, you know?
Right.
But that's one of my favorites.
One of the things I always liked about the Calder and Black Manta bit was it was very, for me, it was very Luke and Vader. Mm-hmm. The idea of from an aesthetic point of, you know, this is what, if Luke had thrown, like, you know, when he makes the offer,
right,
you know, rule everything with me, you know, this is what it might have looked like, the two of them together.
Yeah, it's a great bit. That's some of the strongest stuff I think with his character a lot is that Black Manta stuff.
Right. But yeah, but getting back to, I was saying real quick, getting back to Stargirl, there's an undercurrent in season 2, and I don't want to ruin anything for anyone who hasn't got caught up. But there's definitely the idea of that just because, you know, the JSA was a legacy doesn't mean like the other side of the coin, the villains can't do the exact same thing.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of that in play as well. And it works that way as well as in like in the comics when in Infinity Inc. and stuff, that a lot of times you do have, you know, a relative or, you know, a son or someone stepping into that villain role too. So that's someplace that definitely was, you know, and it's just, I'm bringing it up because it's being reflected heavily in the show right now.
Right.
So.
Like a new generation of heroes also means a new generation of villains in many cases.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
I always love too, for me, that Robin is becoming a little bit more of a legacy thing, more than Batman is, right? I mean, there's been recent things with like future state and stuff like that, which I haven't read a whole lot of just yet. So I know that somebody else is running around as Batman now,
right.
In that storyline. But I think that it's kind of neat as you get the Bat family getting bigger. I like kind of the elegance of I like that Robin's like a hand-me-down, that like this is what you guys all like, what you're all going to do, like what you're going to put on. This is the aesthetic and everything. This is sort of like the mantle that you're going to carry as you're sort of learning the ropes. And then at some point you're going to graduate to something, you know, to your own, and then you're going to pass it down to the person behind you. And I like that it's become that over the years, and like way more than Batman, which I think a lot of the attempts for Batman to become a legacy stuff, like like none of it sticks.
Right.
You know? Mm-hmm. You know, I love the Dick Grayson as Batman stuff, but it's like, you know, it's like, I think the Nightwing persona is too charismatic. Right. Like we like him too much as Nightwing, that like honestly seeing him as Batman is kind of a letdown a little bit sometimes. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think it always goes back to the idea of in Morrison's JLA, there's a point where there's a future story where the Joker's running around and Tim is Batman at that point. You know, and the Joker makes an offhanded comment about, you know, anyone besides Bruce looks like they're wearing their daddy's pants.
Right.
You know, they just can't fill his shoes at all. And it doesn't really work. And I agree with you. They don't, you know, there hasn't been a real serious attempt, I don't think, in a while. I mean, maybe the future state stuff may be the closest thing to it. The idea that someone else could do it.
Right.
You know, that's the thing that I feel like a lot of times is, you know, I don't know if anyone, I mean, again, thinking back to the 90s and Bane and, you know, Batman and what happens in that story. And then the fact that you have Azrael, you know, step up.
Right. That one didn't work out.
No, you've got the Bat train. I mean, but again, I don't know how seriously they were, you know, I've never, like, unlike with Death of Superman, where they had a plan and they, you know, they came up with an idea of like, we're going to have these 4 Supermen, and then, you know, one of them, you know, we're trying to figure out who's Superman.
Right.
And then I don't know how, I've never seen it documented, at least for me, the idea of how serious they were about Jean-Paul Vallée being Batman. Right.
Yeah.
Right. Or even later on, like when Jim Gordon became Batman too.
Oh yeah, that too. God.
Right? Like, I mean, which
I forgot about that.
That screamed like This is 6 months.
Right.
This is a year.
Yeah.
Right. Sure.
That was not made. That was not made to last.
No, it wasn't.
For the Robins, it's funny because I feel like Robin has become like superhero prep school. It's people being prepared for something else now, which I love. Like I love that aspect about it, but it's kind of like ever since Robin, promoted himself, ever since Dick Grayson, basically said he graduated and he's like, I'm my own superhero now. Like it has become like all of the rest of them, they pass through, they come from being like, like middle school version superhero, or then do this, then go to a superhero, or they're recruited like Jason Todd was, and Tim Drake was, just somebody that Bruce Wayne sees that they have the need for that role and ability to do it. But yeah, like now so many people pass through it. Like Stephanie Brown started as Spoiler, then Robin, and then Batgirl.
Yeah.
Right. Like everyone, it's like college. It's like superhero college for these kids.
Batgirl is the one. Batgirl is the one that I wish would become the same thing, because there was Barbara who went on to become Oracle, and then and it's like Stephanie was one of my favorite runs as Batgirl.
Yeah, it's fun stuff.
And then of course Cassandra. Like we're glossing over Cassandra, but I like that Cassandra was it in between and then went on. Like she became Black Bat. I mean, she's orphan now, but but there was before New 52 and her reintroduction in Batman Eternal. Right. Yeah. Batman Eternal. Like she was Black Bat. And I wish that Batgirl was kind of becoming the same thing for the Robin. Which is, like I said, it's just something I love. And as far as like the future state stuff goes, I think what's confusing to me is I don't know like how serious DC is about like making it a status quo thing, or if it's just sort of like, not a, you know what I mean? But it's just sort of like a big event piece that we're just going to build a lot of books around and stuff like that. You know what I mean? So maybe that stuff's going to have some lasting effect, but time will tell. I think for that matter, so in that respect, I think kind of the most successful version of Batman as Legacy is Terry in Batman Beyond. And I think again, like the sense of time, I think is crucial about this. I think the fact that it's so far in the future that, you have an understanding of like why Bruce can't do it. You're just looking at him and you're like, he's too old. And it's also far enough into the future that you've aged out like any of the beloved Bat family characters that are also kind of like too old to really do it.
Right.
And it's just sort of like, it just makes a natural fit for us to accept this new character who's also, he's not going to do it like Clifton was saying. He's not going to do it the way that Bruce did it. Not at all.
Right.
Right.
Well, I mean,
not the same set of skills.
No, I mean, right, exactly, not at all. But it's one of those things where I do think it's interesting that, we look at, again, we're talking about, you have characters that come into being Robin and they sort of like get their feet wet, or they get their on the job training and then they move on. Another one that I always thought was interesting, and we'll come back to Terry, was the idea of was it Duke?
The one that was Thomas?
Yeah, that ends up becoming the Signal. Yeah. Like I thought that was one that was interesting. Like he's only Robin for a very short time, and then immediately is like, I'm going to be this other thing.
Right.
But it was that to me, especially with the fact that the way that they're doing the new front, the was it Infinite Frontier stuff? Is that what we're on? Is that the latest? And the fact that we have a different Batman, but it's not him. It's a totally different character that was sort of part of the Bat family, but sort of not part of the Bat family. But
yeah, I think the Signal persona was rushed.
Yeah.
I think I would have liked to have seen him a little bit more time as Robin. I think that would have been a nice telling, like also like maturation of the character to see Damian give up the Robin mantle for Duke, to be like, okay, it's your time, and now I'm going to go on and be my own thing.
Right.
For me.
Yeah. No, I got you.
Because,
like I said,
I mean, he's created and becomes the Signal so fast.
Right. Well, that's my point. Yeah, that's my whole thing. It's like, I think it's really, he's very much on the fast track of like, I don't need to be Robin. Like I could do this other thing. I don't think there's even like a lengthy run of the two of them together.
Right.
It happens so fast. Yeah. But getting back to Terry, Terry is very much that, like you said, everyone's aged out, or dead. Right. That can't possibly do it. And when Terry is with, becomes Batman, it's a completely, again, I think honestly, it's the purest Batman legacy thing we've ever gotten.
Yeah,
because
I do too.
he really just takes the name for the most part, and then does what he like. The whole thing beyond that, and not to make the pun, but is he does it's not this ain't your grandpa's Batman fanboy. It's like that whole feeling of we have and again they've talked about it in interviews and stuff. When I say they, I mean like the creators behind it. The idea that they didn't want to do Joker Beyond, even though they eventually do, and they don't want to do like Mr. Freeze Beyond, even though they sort of do.
It's a good episode though.
It's a great episode. It's great. They don't want to do like Penguin Beyond, but they don't want to do all that stuff strictly so that Terry can basically stand on his own 2 feet as Batman. And as much as I push, I think that in a way I wanted more of that stuff, and we get it towards the end. I'm kind of glad they didn't, because you do get a lot of characters that are strictly Terry's villains,
right?
Or there are characters that are strictly for that era of Batman stuff, right?
Yeah.
And I think when you're creating legacy, I think it's always cool to have, like I said, Wally go up against the rogues, but at the same time, I like that we got, Tar Pit or Peekaboo or, Girder or any of those characters that, that were basically characters that came out of, Wally's time as the Flash.
I think that there's a blend is nice, right? To get kind of the old guard that knew the previous one. And also, right, like the vagueness of Batman Beyond, I enjoy as an audience member, right? Because it's that whole, like the future in the Terminator, like before we actually saw it, like you just see it in glimpses, and it's sort of like, like you wonder what happened to Two-Face, and you wonder what happened to the Riddler, and are they dead? Are they still out there somewhere, right? Like what's their tragic ending, or did they rehabilitate? And I like that the creators were disciplined enough to sort of like, even though we're joking around about it, where we did get like Mr. Freeze and we got Ra's and we did get Joker, but like really, like that's it. And we see a glimpse of Bane's fate, but like really, that's it. And in all other instances, like we don't get Mad Hatter, we don't get Poison Ivy, we don't and it's like and as a result, you do get like Shriek and Bloodsport and Spellbinder and all these other like cool villains that like that are Terry's bad guys, which is neat. Are there any instances of legacy characters that you can think of where you think the successor outshined the original?
Yes.
Okay, like who?
Michael Holt, Mr. Terrific.
Yeah.
Okay.
For sure.
Yeah, good one. I forget he's legacy.
Yeah. I mean, I always
completely.
I mean, Terry Sloan was Mr. Terrific, and it's fair play and all that stuff. But really, I mean, to spoil a 40-year-old story, I mean, honestly, like, he's one of those characters that comes out of the golden age of comics it was part of the JSA that nobody did anything with. Like he's not like Alan Scott or Jay Garrick or Wildcat or any of those guys. He's a member, but it's not somebody that anybody really used. And then he's in a JLA JSA crossover, and he's the victim of a murder. So it's kind of like beyond that, nobody's there's no nostalgic. I remember the time Terry Sloan. There's none of those kind of stories. So for Michael Holt to be the new Mr. Terrific, I think that character basically took on a life of his own, and then definitely became like I don't think any, like you said, no one really remembers that there was a Mr. Terrific before
right
the version that we know now.
Yeah. Anybody else out there? Tommy, Clifton, what do you guys think?
No, I can't even think of anybody. I can't even think of anybody that eclipses on that level.
I mean, this is kind of a weird way to come about it, but because I like the character a lot, but I like all the characters involved here a lot, but I would say Kamala Khan as Ms. Marvel. Yeah. It's not that I didn't like Carol Danvers. Like I like Carol Danvers fine as Captain Marvel, but for some reason I just did not connect with the Carol Danvers Ms. Marvel character. Like those stories. I don't know why. I like her fine as Captain Marvel, and I like that they've made a completely new thing out of the Ms. Marvel character.
Well, right. I think I'm not speaking for you, I'm speaking for me, but for me, when I think about Carol Danvers, so many of her stories are, Carol Danvers gets the short end of the stick, or a lot of times she's the victim of terrible writing. Yeah, that right. Some of that Claremont stuff in the 70s is problematic and tragic. Yeah, absolutely, for sure. Yes. So I mean, it's one of those things. it's a lot of the stuff that they do to that character is just awful.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I mean, and it's one of those things where some people say, obviously the Avenger stuff I think is way worse. And then her own stuff like you said, by Claremont that basically sort of gets retconned or sort of we don't even see it in her own book. It happens kind of off panel for a long time.
Yeah.
Even up to the point of no one ever really thinks about this, but when the X-Men invite Rogue to join the team, Carol's had been all through them in space with the group. And then she's kind of like, I can't believe you're basically taking in, this villain to the mansion, right. But there's a lot of stuff with that I know for me, it's hard. I love the character, but it's hard for me to reconcile all that stuff just because it's, she just they kick her around for a good long time.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think, that is a big part of it for me too. So I think what I like is that Carol Danvers, I like that she takes the legacy of Captain Marvel. I do like that because she had a connection to the original Marvel character. So I like that they move her up, and then I like that they basically create a whole new Ms. Marvel thing to have associations with that isn't that stuff that I did not connect with that Frank was talking about. That's what I like about this.
What I also like about Kamala Khan is the fact that she's a fan. She's a fan of Carol's, which is one of the things where I don't know. Like we said, I don't know anybody who's like, oh yeah, Carol Danvers is my character. And I'm like, well, your character gets the crap kicked out of her by her, by writer after writer in the company for a long, long time. But that character, she's a big fan. And it's part of the reason why she takes the name is she wants to, honor the legacy of, which I thought was an interesting take. Mm-hmm. So,
yeah.
Right. So what about the reverse then? Are there any characters out there that you think the original, so far at least, has always outshined the successor, or any attempt to bring in sort of a version 2 or a protege? Or
I don't think they've managed very well to get a new Dr. Fate.
Okay.
like DC tries an awful lot to give somebody that helmet.
Right. And it is an easy one. You can just stick that helmet on anybody and you got a new Dr. Fate. So it's an easy gimmick to pull.
Right.
DeMatteis does a pretty good job, but at the same time, it's Kent Nelson is a character in the book. This is right around, this is like the early, 89, 90. This is 30 years ago. I wish it was collected. It's a pretty fun run of books, but, at one point, Dr. Fate's a female, in that run.
Yeah, that's right.
I
thought you were talking about the most recent attempt too, the one that Levitz was working on in whatever that was, 2015, 2016.
I haven't read that one, and people speculate that might be what we're getting in Black Adam, and I don't know if that's what we are getting or not. And if that is, then that's great. But it's one of those things where I just feel like they can't settle on. There was Fate, which came out of 0 Hour, where you had kind of a Fate had an Ankh tattooed on his face and had melted down the helmet to being a knife and some other stuff, like these weapons that turn the helm of Fate into melted down, turned into weapons and stuff. Right. I just think it's one of those where they just can't seem to find the right fit. Figuratively and literally, they can't seem to find the right fit for that character. And I think it's one of those things where I'd like to see that happen, but they haven't done it yet.
I think back to Gotham Central, and I don't think he was intended to be really a legacy character, but it's kind of a cheat. But I think Jim Gordon. Right. When it's funny because we talk about Gotham Central a lot and it's an awesome set of books, but Jim Gordon's not commissioner in those books. Mm-hmm. It was at a time post Officer Down where he's retiring from the force for health reasons after he's been shot. And so there's Michael Akins is commissioner of the Gotham Police Department. And I like Akins a lot. I love his character a lot, but I think Jim Gordon's so beloved.
Right.
And I think it's a lesson in. And it wasn't like they killed off Jim Gordon. He was around still. And I think it's a lesson in if the character's going to stay around, it's hard for readers to accept just okay, well, he's not there. I feel like that there's got to be some plan for what the next chapter is going to be. Mm-hmm. If we're going to try and turn the page and try and put somebody else in that position, because I just got the sense that there were so many creators out there and so many people that were just couldn't wait to write Jim Gordon back.
Right.
Well, because it was so familiar. And I think that people didn't know offhand, what that dynamic of Batman and Akins on the roof with the back signal was going to be, because there just wasn't enough time with it yet.
Right.
You know?
Well, I mean, that's why, again, I think we get back to the idea of Batman Beyond and the idea that, yes, we turn the page, but we don't really turn the page.
Right.
I mean, we do. I mean, it's a different commissioner, but it's still a Commissioner Gordon, right?
Right. Yeah.
So, which is not a bad thing. Which is not a bad thing. Mm-hmm. I'm all for it. It was a cool idea, and I like it. But it's also one of those things of, in a way, I kind of wish we had gotten, Commissioner Beyond, in a way.
Right. Yeah. Mm.
To have that be something that was wholly and solely Terry's, as opposed to a tie back to Bruce's time.
Right. All right. So we'll start getting ready to wrap up. We'll touch upon other media first, really quickly, just like Legacy and any instances of where we see it on movies and television and stuff like that. We lumped all the superhero stuff, even MCU and cartoons. If it was superhero stuff, we lumped it in with the comics because, like, for us, we all kind of see it as the same. But is there anything out there that Tommy, you brought up Airbender, which I think is a great one, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's got Legacy built into the concept.
Right.
What else is out there?
One that's been long running that I'm a fan of is Doctor Who.
Yeah.
Which approaches it in an interesting way where it's always the same. Like it combines being a same character that just keeps going and legacy. So you basically have completely different personalities and different people filling the roles. So every time, I don't know how much y'all know about Doctor Who, but he regenerates. And when he regenerates, almost all the time, except for once, when he regenerates, he becomes a completely different person. Like that's when they would change actors. And so now, like the new ones aren't expected to act like the old ones. They're expected to come up with their own new character that is kind of connected to the old one, but like now it's their take on it. And they have like carte blanche to create like a new character out of this in this position and in this situation. And I think it's a fascinating approach to Legacy too. And that like there's always like an undercurrent of stuff that's story that's always there, of character elements that's always there. And then the shell around it is completely different every time.
Yeah. I like that aspect. I think that's a fascinating aspect. It seems liberating as an actor to be like like kind of fun to play. Like what little flourishes can I add that's sort of like a wink and a nod to what came before, while at the same time not doing like for some stupid reason I came up with Face Off. I just like the John Woo movie, because I remember like all the interviews of Travolta and Nick Cage talking about like they were deciding on like mannerisms for the good guy and for the bad guy to match. And they're like bad guy's got this walk and stuff. And so for not to have to like watch basically tape of Doctor Who and be like, okay, he does this in this situation, so now I have to Like, yeah. I think that's fun. That's a good idea, I think. Any other ones out there?
The only one that I was going to mention, and it's more so with the first incarnation of it than anything else, would be for me is TNG, Star Trek Next Generation.
Right.
Oh yeah, duh. That's a good one.
It's very much the idea of like there's this stuff, there's the Federation, all the stuff set up in the '60s show, and then very much so the next one, the one with Picard and the next Enterprise that's set in the future, is very much a legacy thing, right? It's very much the idea that all the stuff that happened in the first show has happened. It's all it's all part of canon and legacy and all that stuff. But the missions of the Enterprise have continued, and Picard's the new captain.
And it is still the Enterprise. It's still technically the same commission.
Yes, right. So that to me is one that I always and since then obviously it's spun off into a million other places, but books and comics and more shows and animation and all that stuff, which is great. But at the same time, that's when I really like, oh yeah, that's clearly a continuation of something that came 25 years beforehand.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, that's a really good one. Yeah, I forget about that one sometimes, but yeah, it's I love TNG.
Yeah, of course.
That's probably why. It's because like I think Star Trek like that's in my head as like the default, even more than Kirk and Spock. Unfortunately, sorry everybody.
Right.
TNG is the one I grew up on, so it's mine.
Sure. Right. It's understandable. I totally get that. I'm just saying it's one of those things where like, oh yeah, but there was all this stuff that happened, prior to that. So
yeah. All right, so we'll start closing out with we'll each name a character that we would like to see become a legacy character. But first, if you like the show, you can check out all of our episodes on YouTube at letmeknowhowitis.com. Just please, however you find us. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave us a review. And finally, if you have any topic ideas, send them to the show, either on Twitter or in the comments. Our Twitter handle is our show's initials, LMKHII. All right. Who wants to go first? Legacy character we want to see.
I go first.
Okay.
James Bond.
Oh.
I mean, we got James Bond Jr., right?
Yeah, thank you. James Bond Jr. That thing was wildly successful and pulled from Ian Fleming himself on creating the legacy for the character. We've seen it done in Kingsman. It can happen. There's nothing that suggests that it can happen. It takes away the idea of to me the whole as much as we talked about legacy characters, the one thing that I think we didn't delve full enough just because time constraints and just the theory of how well it works. Everybody ideally loves a character based upon how they grew up. But the hardest part is showing your kids how that's cool in an era they never knew about. So either you retcon the original concept of this character and dump on what you grew up on just to sacrifice it for your kids, or show another iteration of the character that models this time. And there's no, and I don't see how that does not work for James Bond, because guess what? Out of the Cold War, it's hard to establish why a spy works in today's society without changing the concept of James Bond. Let him be a junior. It works. People love that that crazy cartoon, but to act like it wasn't successful. It didn't work. It didn't have a ton of merch that made it money. Let it happen.
Right. Yeah, I'm with you. I can see I can see obviously the creative way to do it, right? It's, and especially the fact that he's been played by 6 actors, right? And there is a desire to sort of like explain why he looks different in all these movies, right? Like we want them all to count. And it's like, for me, like I just don't need an explanation for that. I don't care about somebody else being 007, right? I just I don't like the fan theory that says like, oh, that James Bond is the code name, right? Like I'm like, no, like I don't need an explanation why he's blonde now. Like like I just accept it. Like I'm good,
Kind of like Han Solo, that whole thing, explanation of Solo.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. But no, I understand that it's there, and you raise an awesome point about like, essentially the one you grew up with is the one that you like, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Because I said it at least 4 times today.
Yeah.
So yeah. No, you're right. So all right, Clifton, you want to go next?
Yeah, I'm going to go back to comics.
Okay.
And this is a character I've mentioned before. This is a character that's coming up, about to be a little wider known thanks to Disney Plus, and that is Moon Knight. I think there's room in the story for Moon Knight Legacy for a couple of reasons. I think it would be fun. One is that when Marvel did the big push to Moon Knight got his solo series, and Bill Sienkiewicz has told stories about this, is they were really trying to capitalize on Neil Adams' Batman, like the demon, that type of Batman where you got like Batman in the desert, like swashbuckling.
Right.
That's what they were chasing. With some of the early Moon Knight stuff, to the point that they got Sienkiewicz because he could draw like Neil Adams. But then he became Sienkiewicz and started drawing not like Neil Adams and creating the Sienkiewicz art that we all love, and taking Moon Knight to a completely different place that was not where Marvel intended it to go or thought it would go. But I think it would be fun, like if he had a legacy, kind of like a Robin, just to play off of that initial desire from Marvel to chase that era of Batman, the Denny O'Neil, Neil Adams Batman era. And the other thing is, like in his story, I think it just works no matter how you interpret Moon Knight's story. Of like, Moon Knight was like appointed a hero by the Egyptian moon god Khonshu.
Right.
So either the god could appoint somebody else a hero, or he could believe they appoint somebody else a hero, or somebody else could believe they're appointed a hero. So there's plenty of room for there to be someone else being like, I'm Moon Knight now in the story, and it always works.
Okay. No, it's a good one. That would be fun. Frank, who's yours?
I was thinking about this, and for me, I think the idea that there's no, granted, we get people that try to step up and be the new Sorcerer Supreme. I think it's interesting that as the legacy goes, they toy with it every once in a while. Like, I know Brother Voodoo was at one point, and there's what if stories like where magic, Ilyana steps up and becomes a Sorcerer Supreme. There really hasn't been they're getting ready, in the comics, they're going to quote unquote kill him. So it's, that's like the death of Doctor Strange is a series or miniseries that's coming up or an event. So it's interesting to see who's going to take up the mantle, but there's not really a push to be that character. And I'm surprised that there has never been an illegitimate Strange kid story.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
At all. There's never been one, not whether it's with Clea or with anybody else that he's been with throughout the time that are in the books. So I would like to see someone, whether it's a blood relative or someone else, go ahead and take up the mantle and have a new Sorcerer Supreme for a while.
Okay. No, that'd be cool. This was a hard one for me because really, honestly, I was hard thinking of characters that never had one.
Right.
Right. Because, whether or not they stuck, there's been a lot of attempts, or at least somebody has done it for a story.
Ooh.
But,
but before you get into it, Zach, real quick, going to Frank's theory. The weird part is Strange. He's part of a legacy.
True. He is.
Yeah. And we never get the mark. Well, we do seldomly in sprinkles, but we never get, other than the Ancient One, or what's the thing around his neck?
The Agamotto.
Oh,
Agamotto is one as well. But we never get the inkling that he comes from a legacy of Sorcerer Supremes. That's all.
Right. The only thing that we get to is like in Jim Valentino's Guardians of the Galaxy, the one that's not the one that is in the movies. There is the character shows up in Guardians 2 at the end. He's part of, I believe he's part of Stallone's, little group with Martin X and some of the other characters. That red dragon worm looking snake looking thing, I can't remember the character's name, but in Jim Valentino's run, he is the Sorcerer Supreme, in the 1,000 years in the future. So,
in the future.
Yeah. So that's the only place that we've really gotten, I know at one point, Rintrah, was the Minotaur type character. That was sort of being teased as being the character that's going to become the Sorcerer Supreme. But again, it doesn't really happen all that often. Go ahead, Zach. Sorry.
So, it was hard to think of a lot of instances where somebody's not had one. But I landed on Professor X, even though there have been instances where somebody else is taken over as headmaster of the school. But I'm approaching it more from who would take over as the activist component of the character that I feel like we see less and less over the years, right? Who would be out there talking mutant rights that's sort of the pillar of leadership. And I just think that would be kind of neat to see somebody, if the name Professor X became sort of a legacy character,
Right.
So that was the one I ended up landing on, which I think would be kind of cool.
I like that.
So anyway, so we want to hear what you guys have to say about legacy characters. Hit us up in the comments or on Twitter. As always, we'll post links and examples to everything we talk about on letmeknowhowitis.com. Just please remember to like us and follow us on social media, and we will see you guys next time.